recordings, record locally. Dang it. I missed it. It's like there's a cool thing we can do. But always trying to bring on that new extra pizzazz, y'all. There's some cool stuff we could do when it comes to if we start to lag.
It's a fun program.
Fun program. You guys are along for the ride. When we're talking sex exploring, we're also talking technology exploring too, because we're figuring it out over here on this end. Well, welcome to Sexy Book Club, everybody. I'm Braxton with Birds and Bees Podcast, and here with my co-host, the amazing, the wonderful Dr. Cami Hurst.
Yes, hello, and I apologize if I'm lagging. We are really struggling technology-wise this morning, so.
Yes, but it's okay, because today, everything that we've been getting ready for the Sexy Book Club is totally worth the wait. It's also totally worth the technological movements that you're going to be a part of. Today, we're going to be covering Sexy Book Club's No Bad Parts by Richard Schwartz. Yeah, no bad parts. You're going to find out why, especially if you've been reading the book. So, but first things first, Cami, you have some things that are coming up for you when it comes to if you want to become an asexual sex therapist, or you just want to be a therapist that is much better at addressing sexual health issues, understanding how to bring this up with your clients, or become just that much better of a therapist for sexual health. Cami, tell us when you've got your training coming up.
Yeah, so actually we're starting today. There's a group of us. I capped the class at about 8 to 10 therapists. The goal is just increasing our sexual competency, whether or not you want to be a sex therapist or you just want to be a sexually competent therapist, because sexuality is part of our wholeness. So you can join me. I'm going to be running that about 3 times a year. So head to my website, camihurst.com, and you can see what I've got for practitioners to increase their sexual competency.
Right on. And mine, I've got a presentation coming up on the 26th that I'm really excited about, because it's going to be all about the 4-dimensional wheel. So utilizing the spirit, mental, physical, and emotional sides as a therapist to be able to bring those components in while you're exploring sexuality during faith transition. That's actually going to be this. I've got a private one that's happening at the end of this month. And then there is going to be a one that anyone can come to, but in particular therapist at the Generations Conference in downtown Salt Lake. It's going to be at the Saltaire. And that one's going to be really fun to be at. Lots of different presentations, lots of continuing education that you can go to. That's May 22nd. I believe it also is the 23rd as well. And I think they've got me presenting at 2 in the afternoon. I'd have to double check that, but That's a Monday.
Oh, I'm excited for you. That's awesome.
Yeah, it's going to be a lot of fun. But there's also new things coming on with Birds and Bees Podcast. Just continue to stay tuned with it. I'll be doing more with the website and things along those lines, but just kind of getting back in the swing of things. I had a 2.5-year, 3-year hiatus, and I'm ready to get back into it. So pretty excited for it. I'm going to start doing more seasonal things so I can make it more sustainable.
Good.
All right. Well, Cami, one of my favorite things, this book, No Bad Parts, because it wasn't necessarily directed sexually, I was at first being like, oh, I like IFS, internal family systems theory, but I never dove very far into it. So I'm really glad we actually took the chance to do this one. And I've referred it to 3 of my clients, one of which we have made massive gains in therapy just because she read the book.
Wow.
And it's been really cool. And we're talking sexual on this too. Like we've been working it while we've been working the book. So
that's exciting. I wondered what you thought when I put it on the list, because it's not a sexual health book. It really is a systems trauma book, meaning, so you have your background in social work. My background is in marriage and family therapy. So systems are kind of easier for my brain. That's what I was trained in. So I wondered, I put this book out there. I wondered what you thought when I said, let's do this for the podcast, because there's a connection, but only if you make it explicitly,
Yes. Well, and so to be honest, I actually supervise for licensure MFTs
Mm-hmm.
because I've done a lot of training through or I've done completed the supervisor trainings through the AMFT or AAMFT courses, so that I do have quite much more of a background in systems, which I get really excited about because I think systems are a huge important deal. And so in learning about it, I was just kind of like, oh, you learn this firefighter and you learn these other parts. And I was like, oh, I don't want to use all their terms, but I didn't quite realize that there was only 3. I thought it
Mm-hmm.
was like, this is a firefighter. And this is, I'm like, oh, okay, we got so many more components playing. But within this, I got excited to understand that they fall under a firefighter, a manager, or an exiled part.
Mm-hmm.
And so putting this together, the other thing that I really liked is that even though it's not explicitly a sexual health book, well, a lot of things that you and I have talked about don't necessarily all have to be, well, is this a part of sex? Just like we continue to talk about it. Does it have to do with my genitals? Is that sex? Then no, then we don't need to talk about it. So I like that we're exploring in this regard too, of almost anything can be extrapolated to identify how does this show up within my sexual health realm.
Yeah. So for our listeners who are like, what are we talking about? What is IFS? There's this several models that have been developed for treating trauma. People are probably familiar with EMDR or brain spotting or somatic experiencing, but another one is called IFS, and it's a model of therapy created by Richard Schwartz, and it's about how we have so many parts of ourselves. And in most theories of therapy, the goal is congruence, or the goal is making all the sides of yourself be at peace with one another, or kind of coming together with one identity and not fighting against yourself internally or mentally. And so, Richard Schwartz, there is research backing this up as far as really successful treatment trauma model. But it's also really helpful when you're not treating capital T trauma and you're really just trying to understand yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And it looks a little bit like when we were listening to the book, like Pixar in the movie. What is the movie with Riley and all her feelings? Inside Out.
Inside Out. Yes.
And it talks about in her brain how there's so many different people, and depending on who has the microphone, that's how Riley behaves. And that is just like IFS. Someone who wrote Inside Out had to have known about systems theory.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And while it kept it simple, having 5, I love that it is like, if they would have gone one step farther to be like, well, actually, no, they kind of did, because fear was doing certain things, disgust was doing one. I wish that they would have brought anger in to be like, if I don't do this, if I don't yell at my dad, if I don't this, like if there was almost a fear within the anger, because I think anger gets brought up as like, I'm angry, end of story emotion. And usually
Right.
anger is there to protect the other ones.
Yeah.
So other than that, that's a great, I agree with you 100% that that's a great way to conceptualize a lot of these parts. So I think what we'll do is Cami put together really cool slides, and I want to put the slides in here. Oh, there we go. Nope, that's not what I meant. So I really like this. This will be something that if you want to, if we move through the slides a little too quickly, beautiful part is you can pause the video and you got, this is going to be good. You can read through it. But I do like that the basic part. So what you're going to see is we're going to go over 4 components here. Really, there's more that you can do. And the book has a lot of self-guided, or not self-guided, but guided methods to be able to find your specific parts and engage. But from what we're going to cover today, we're going to go over the 6 C's of IFS. We're also going to go through what the managers are, what the exiles are, who the firefighters are, and how they may show up. And so if you have thoughts, ideas, again, comment here, as well as share with us your experience when you read this book, or what your experience was while reading the book, whether it be a sexual health standpoint or what you discovered about yourself. We'd love to hear it. So basic parts, right? when we are, so I like this part where we're talking about the self-led. This essentially leads into those 6 C's. When we are self-led, or you are a part of yourself, I guess that's the other component, right? We've got the 3
Yeah.
and
The
our
self
person.
is like the whole part, that congruent part, that healthy, centered, best
Mhm.
part of you when you're operating intentionally and feeling all the C's.
All of the C's, which are
And
these.
you're in self.
Mhm.
Mhm, mhm.
So you're essentially inherently calm, compassionate, confident, curious, creative, courageous, clear, and connected. And I really liked all those 3
Yeah,
C's.
he says that's our natural state, that those aren't things that we have to develop or work for, that actually when we do our work, that's just revealed. Like at the core, humans, when in self, are just confident and curious and creative and courageous. And that felt really comforting to me.
Mhm. I really like that too, especially in some of the activities that he, or the walkthroughs he did. When you start recognizing, noticing, and these parts are showing up, and you let them show up, and you invite them into a different room, or you just invite them to tell their story, and you get into that place where you start feeling self. There was the curiosity, what is happening here, and the connection or the compassion. You start moving that direction towards self, towards others, towards these parts, just inherently. And I also really love the thought process that we are not trying to find these parts to eliminate them. This is not a hit.
Right.
We're not trying to get any of these to be gone or out of the relationship of you. It's recognizing they have good intentions. All these parts have good intentions to keep your system working the way that it's supposed to. That can be keeping you alive, being able to keep you in whatever the goal is for these parts, or what your desires are.
Yeah. I love saying that our self is not out to remove all managers, remove all exiles, remove all firefighters. The
Mhm.
goal is to really coordinate them. He uses the word like an orchestra conductor to tell them when it would be helpful for them to play and when you don't need them anymore and they can just, take a break. And so you're in charge of them. You're the conductor of these parts of yourself.
Yes, and then reshift their roles.
Mhm.
Where if they felt like maybe they need to be a protector or to take on this, sometimes that's not what they want to do anyways. They really want to be the other components, like a cheerleader or a coach or a support, versus someone that's different, criticizing or demanding.
Mhm.
So I was already at this slide. I think this is a great way to look at the managers, firefighters, exiles, and self. So let's talk about it in the realm of sexuality. Cami, what were your thoughts when you started thinking of the sexual parts? How did you start to work IFS when it came to sexual self?
Well, I was thinking about, the roles. And so if you want to go maybe back one,
Absolutely.
and so I was thinking, okay, a manager's proactive, it's the protector, um, it controls against all threats. And I was like, okay, how sometimes does that show up sexually? When someone might be, really focused on the rules or feels like sex is a threat. In what ways
Mhm.
do they put all these boundaries around them to keep themselves safe? Or the firefighters, these are really reactive protectors. And the exiles, these are the parts of ourselves that we deny or push away. And it's not so much to be like, okay, I took my sexuality and I made it a manager. It's just, what are the managers I have around sexuality? Okay, what are the firefighters I have in my sexuality? And what are the exiles I have in my sexuality? Um, is kind of how I was thinking it as I was listening to the book. And I think because it was the first time I was laying this lens, I was thinking about me personally. I wasn't really externalizing a whole lot to a lot of my clients. I was thinking, oh, yeah, there was that part of me I exiled when I was 15, and I put a manager in place to keep them exiled. And this was the role of the manager because sex felt scary and dangerous. So it was really interesting to go internally and then in his book, he asked, what age was that? And I was like, oh, I don't know. What age is my sexual exile?
Yes.
I was like 15. I was like, what was happening 15? I'm like, oh, I can remember that this talk I sat and listened to from this man I admired, and I just took it all in as truth. And now I think it's all not very helpful.
Yes, right.
That moment at 15, I exiled a part of myself right there, and
Mhm.
so I did like the book, how at each chapter, the author or the narrator goes quiet, and actually Richard Schwartz comes up, and there's a ton of blank space, and he asks you questions and leaves like 30 seconds of free space for you to think, almost as if you were in a session with Richard Schwartz.
Yeah, I'm going to show this maybe in a vulnerable state when it comes to it, but like I went and did one of his. Oh, it's not going to zoom in, but this is one of the first experiences that I drew up just doing my own. I was like, oh, he's going to walk us through this. This is kind of fun.
Oh, you
And
got a little note card and you let him walk you through it, and you
oh
mapped
yeah.
out your managers and your firefighters and your exiles.
Well, and I didn't even know. So I hadn't. This is me again taking it on, going like, oh, I don't know any of these things like that. But it was just like sit with the part, and I was going through something in my mind, and all of a sudden it's like, now draw what you see, and it's like, okay, so I started drawing it, and then it's like, now see what other part comes in. It's like this dude with a tank, and then there's this like go get him really good guy, and then there's a dude with a mohawk, and then there's this person that can fly, and it's
you have a rebel and a superhero and a yeah.
Oh, fascinating to have to just sit with it. So if you do, I was like, how do people do this with the book? Because that was such a game changer for me in the Audible thing. Just my experience.
Yeah, and I think that's what's cool about this book is it's his first one, I think, directed towards self-help. He does say do this with your therapist, but all his previous books have been for therapists of how to do this with clients. I love that you did that you sat down and did it. I was shopping while
that's what took me so long to get through the dang book, is I was like, we'd get to another one and I'm like, oh, there's another one. I need to pause here so I can get in front of. I ended up doing 2, maybe 3 of them. And then I was like, I need to finish this book. So like, that's when I was doing, some walks and stuff, but enough that if you can sit with it and you can just be open to whatever comes. If you're focused on the sexual side of things, it'll bring up sexual health. If you're focused on relational, it'll bring up relational. If you're focused on yourself and why you feel the things, like it is, these actions are actually really, really cool when it comes to this book.
Yeah. And it really normalizes the human experience of 2 things being true at one time, where there's a part of me that wants this, but there's another part of me that doesn't want it, and really highlights that that's not unhealthy, that's human. Yes. And, this desire to be single-minded about everything and be wholehearted about everything is really inhuman, because we have different parts within us. And that's why there can be these internal wars. We go to war with each other because we're trying to figure out which part of us is going to win. And the job here of the self is to get everybody coordinated and working together, so we're not having these internal wars with the different parts of ourselves.
Yeah. One that stood out to me is this: the most of us carry at least a few sexual burdens, biases, blind spots that we've picked up through our family, through culture, through society. Yes. And you can't not have these things, as much as, like you said, big T trauma, little T trauma. And then there's a certain part of the human experience that is just traumatic anyways. We're going to have a sexual burden and a thought, and that burden may not be something that is like really problematic, but it can be. It can be a belief. It can be a thought. It can be an expectation. It can be what you should do. And we all have those. That's what I thought was very important. And it can show up in any of these 3 ways. And we're trying to work to get to that self. And that's where I think it plays into sexual health the most, is looking at it going, what are the blind spots? Meaning, what don't you see or know from that scenario? And I think that's really important. Like when we start jumping over to maybe the managers and what they do here.
Yeah, and I did use that with a couple in a session last week. We've been having a hard time defining the issue, what the sexual burden is. And I just kind of use this idea of, well, sexually, do you feel calm, confident? I went through the C's and they're like, no. And I'm like, then there's a sexual burden here. We're not sure where it is, but we're going to have to keep digging and so we can just ask ourselves even that, whether we're not sure, we're like, we don't have capital T trauma. But if we don't feel confident, calm, creative, curious sexually, there's probably a sexual burden there. We need to find out which part's managing it, where it came from, what it's scared of, resolve its fears, and then integrate it into the system.
Yeah. So starting off with the managers in a sexual health realm or identity is that managers essentially are there to protect us from ever getting to the exiles. It's like the precursor. They manage and work the system around so that essentially the exiles don't cause problems. Is that what you took from it as well, Cami?
Yeah, that they're like in charge of our daily functioning, and they're getting ready for what's coming next. So anxiety lives here a little bit. We're anticipating what's coming next, and if we're ready for it, and all of our daily duties like studying and deadlines and chores. And he said, sleep intake, food intake, all of these things that we need to keep us alive. Mm-hmm. But the manager can be a good manager, or he can be a really crappy manager and can be over controlling.
Yes. And it can be really good at being over controlling.
And we can have managers that are really lazy. I think when executive functioning is really offline, or maybe when obsessiveness is really in control, that's kind of that manager that's out of control a little bit.
Yeah. I also see I thought it was very interesting, the sleepy. He talked a lot about people getting sleepy, going to take a nap, that you can actually just start feeling really tired. It's just like, oh, let's get out of here, changing certain things.
His job's to, take care of us. And if the situation we're in is overstimulating, it may say, okay, we're going to go take a nap now.
Yep.
But it might also do that if we're overwhelmed. Say, ooh, I'm not comfortable. We're going to go take a nap. I'm overwhelmed.
Absolutely. So I really like that the slide you made here with the sexual managers on how it might show up. We also have another slide of like maybe some listed off ones, but I really like these ones that you brought up. When it comes to, they may say yes to sex to do their job. They may be very much on the side of, I don't want to do this, but in order for what we want to have happen, you've got to do this thing. And so the manager is putting in place things to maybe make sex happen, or to just endure the sexual experience, or be engaged with the monitoring. I experienced this as a child, like maybe, for one out there walking in on your parents or something. And so then there's this part that is like, this manager is like, I will never have my kids experience this, and can hyper focus on, is the door closed? Are the kids in bed? Is it late enough? Is it too late? What noises am I making? What noise is the bed making? What noise is my partner making?
They're evaluating, is this okay? Is this good? Is this right? That anxious part. But also the part of, so it's helpful, but maybe too helpful, maybe sometimes not helpful enough. Our sexual managers also evaluating performance. Did I last long enough? Is my partner enjoying this? Or if sex is a trigger, then it says we're just going to avoid sex at all costs to not experience that trigger. Really trying to just keep us functioning day to day.
Yes. And these are some of the ones that I've seen come up in sessions that I've worked with clients on, such as, don't wear that. You'll make blank happen. You'll turn somebody on. You won't turn them on enough. Remember what happened last time, or if you're too sexy, bad things happen, or if you're not sexy enough, bad things happen. And so there's this overwhelmed stress about wearing something, or everyone else likes this, or you should like this. Sex is scary. Just wait this out. It'll be over soon. getting really tired around the time sex begins to happen. Now that's different than actual times, but we're talking like the avoidant side. Getting anxiety attacks when intimacy, not just sex, but like when kissing, being close, when that type of intimacy and closeness is there.
Anxiety attacks protect us. A lot of times we think about trauma triggers as problems, and they're problematic, but they developed to protect us, to stop a situation or to get us out of a situation. And they're uncomfortable, but they're protective. They completely change the context of what's going on and shut us down so we can't participate.
Mm-hmm. And I've seen some of the avoidance in the, I don't want a relationship anyways. It doesn't really matter. Or not that you have to have a relationship, but I don't want this. Mm-hmm. I'm good without whatever it is. The self wants something, but the manager's saying, no, you don't. You actually don't need that. Mm-hmm. You're like, I do, but I don't. You might find yourself in a tug of war when it comes to something maybe you want sexually or a relationship or an engagement. Any others you might add to this, Cami?
Sexual managers I've seen for both people who might lean towards sexually repressed or sexually obsessed, and they're trying to manage that and show up as normal.
Yes.
You know, I think sometimes people develop an inordinate amount of rules around their sexuality to try to manage it. Purity culture is definitely a sexual manager. Yes. In our society. And sometimes people have to work through that, for sure.
Understood. Absolutely. So let's talk about firefighters. Now, if managers are the precursor to try and protect, firefighters are in the space where the manager situation didn't work and or you overrode them, and now we're in crisis or in a distress space because you broke the rules. Right?
Yeah, this part of ourself is really reactive. Doesn't show up as the best part of ourselves, but just really reactive. Almost anything goes to get the situation back under control. The manager didn't work, so the firefighter comes in as that panic button response. And it's doing its job. The main goal of this book is that none of these are bad parts. We just have to find them, love them, tell them how we'd like them to deal with situations again, let them know they can trust us and integrate them. And I was thinking through like people in my life whose firefighter was really running the show a lot of the time. And most of us probably have someone like that in our life where every minute is an emergency. Like every situation, every event, every life experience ends up turning into an emergency where they're very reactive. They're running on adrenaline, kind of that bull in the china cabinet. I can get like this totally sometimes when I'm completely overwhelmed. My firefighter steps in and I just kind of look like a crazy lady, just trying to get everything done. No skill, really. They're just really reactive. And this is where, I think we can recognize that in ourselves and others around us.
Agreed. And I like that we've got the side of the reactive part of this is we screwed up and now I have to come in and fix this. And so I'm putting out fires, whatever those fires may be. And I've seen in myself that there can be words that start to show like, oh, a firefighter's here. Something just broke. Like for me, I was looking at this when it comes to finances. I will use the word hunker down in my mind or with my partner. Like we just need to hunker down. I'm like, okay, pause. I'm in a firefighter scenario because I feel like something just got broke. I'm going to need to just kind of soothe that part, engage in it. And as you work on yourself, you'll recognize words, actions, behaviors, sensations in the body, and how things come up, such as you may feel like there's certain addictive responses like drinking, eating, drugs, smoking, sweets, sexual imagery, sexual behaviors, any of those things that you can check in with yourself. That's not prescriptive that one of these does it, but you need to look at yourself and see what your patterns are and what your firefighters look like.
Yeah, overindulgence definitely lives with our firefighter,
Mhm.
and it's that trying to get calm and comfort at any cost
Yes.
through, substances or behaviors. Are the firefighter's really overindulgent.
Mhm.
Um, that its job is trying to just get us to a sense of safety at any cost.
Yes. Yep. Trying to get us there and trying to keep the exile from being out, because oftentimes
Mm.
this is the emergency: is the exile has been seen as
Mhm.
naked, seen as weak, seen as whatever it may be. When we'll get into the exiles, but once it's been that way, it's like, nope, we got to get that exile back in its place, unseen, because blank will happen. So they're
Mhm.
doing their job. For me, the sexual firefighters, you may start seeing that dissociation starts to occur. I've seen self harm show up, whether it be, even in the book, they talked about suicidal thoughts showing up. I've seen different forms of self harm, of negative self talk, degrading, physical self harm, beating yourself up over your image, like your body image. Um, and comparing yourself to others, whether it be with sexual images or with what you think your partner is experiencing, or even deciding not to take positive feedback from partners, only focusing on what you perceive as negative and or those negative responses to improve yourself.
Yeah.
You have any you would add to that?
Um, I'm going through a slew of uh, infidelity couples right now, and I think that that's a firefighter showing up and just getting sexual gratification, even if it means breaking our relationship agreements because I need some validation quick.
Mhm.
So I think that can be the sexual firefighter. I think, anytime that you're breaking your sexual agreements, there's probably a firefighter trying to get some kind of safety, centeredness, validation, pleasure, love, even if it's in the worst way. um, I see the firefighters a little bit desperate.
Yes.
Mhm.
That's kind of what firefighters are doing, right? It's
Yeah.
how do you put this out and how do we do it the quickest with the least amount of harm done? Because there's already harm happening.
Mhm,
And how do we
mhm,
save whoever's in the midst of it?
mhm,
Great analogy with that. So let's talk about self as exile.
mhm.
This is one that I was having a little bit harder at the very beginning. Like, what's the exile? Even as I had, my first post up here, this internal dude that was actually surrounded by barbed wire fence. I was like,
Mhm,
what's this weak dude? And that was, as we went on, I'm like, oh, those are the exiles. That is the part
mhm.
that is weak. That's the part that is problematic, that's been hurt, memories, thoughts, past experiences, um, often seen in very vulnerable places, is what I was hearing show up, and that's what has been my personal experience. Has that been what you've understood it to be, Cami?
Yeah, that, the firefighter and the manager, that's the parts of ourselves that are protecting us and protecting the exile. They're from either getting out, where it's too dangerous, so we've got to lock them up, or they're not, or we judge them. They're not appropriate. They're not valuable. That part of us is embarrassing. So we lock it up and try to keep it from messing up our lives, basically. And
Yeah.
I think, we get messages from the time we're young. I remember in the book he's saying, a teacher approves this about you, but discourages that about you. Oh, we found a little exile. You're dating and your first romantic relationship approves this about you, but disapproves about that about you. Oh, we've got a little exile. And so um, I wondered how many little exiles I've got wandering around inside myself. And it's really interesting, just developmental psychology. I'm like mid 40s, so are all my friends. And developmentally, that's when we start reevaluating if what we had in the first half of our life is what we want to keep from the second half of our life. And I realize it's a lot of examining our exiles. You know, where did that free spirited part of me go? Where did the Sexually, the person who sought pleasure go? And we start to look at who are my exiles? Why have I locked them up? Why am I so scared of them being a part of my wholeness? You know, in the book he's talking about, there's 3 main reasons why we exile parts of us. So that might help get it a little bit more clearer. But the first is either caretakers or peers were bothered when we showed that vulnerable part of us.
Mm-hmm.
Second, caretakers or peers were disturbed by that part of you, by your vitality. And 3, you were hurting and ended up displaying behaviors that triggered others or disturbed yourself. So caretakers, peers, and ourself can all send parts of ourself to exile.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. The things showing up when it comes to those exiles, I oftentimes I liked in the book where he talks about that intense distress starts to show up. And that's when the managers or the firefighters show you're going to meet them first.
Mm-hmm.
But you have to kind of see what those exiles are. And I thought it was very important to recognize you can't just surpass the firefighter or the manager. You
Mm-hmm.
need to acknowledge them because they are over that scenario and they can get very reactive if you start trying to just take away the exiles or bring them out and just be very validating because they're trying really hard to save you from something. So with these sexual exiles experiencing sexual repression of, I don't want to experience any of this, so I don't have to play any of that. I love that you put on here internalized homophobia, internalized transphobia. And I'd even put into there, internalize the way that we feel we should be. Just a lot. I felt like there was a lot of shoulds when it comes to sexual exile. I shouldn't be this sexual. I shouldn't want that. Mm-hmm. Nobody else seems to want this much sex. Nobody else seems to have this much of a movement away from sex or have so much disinterest. Therefore, I'm bad, I'm wrong, or I expressed this to a partner and then they laughed at me. Not going there again. Mm-hmm. And then all the things that we learned from society of where you should be, what you shouldn't be. That was a lot of what I saw exile starting to show up as, or how I perceive that is that you're breaking some form of should, and you are not acceptable the way that you are in that way, or you were taught that what you are is bad, or you experience something very confusing and painful in those ways. And that's how some of that internalized homophobia, past traumas can affect and create exiles.
Yeah. And that was all self-directed. You gave awesome, great self-directed examples of ways that we've compared ourselves to the should and then sent an exile. I think some exiles too are externalized, meaning, partners really can't be trusted.
Yes.
Or, people will take advantage of you. Or so whether I'm the one who has to be shunned and exiled, or is it I have to shun that part of me because it will get taken advantage of. It will be dangerous. It will lead to scary things for me. I think abstinence-only education is a form of sexual exiles because it's like you're going to get pregnant, sick, and die if you have sex.
Yep.
So, we're just going to exile that part of you because we can't trust you. It's just too dangerous. It will completely overpower you.
Yeah. Which then you have someone jump on that bandwagon and go, sweet, I won't. We have purity culture. We have this. And then all of a sudden it's like you're married and they go, great, now go do that. And we're like, yeah, that one doesn't shift super quick. That's not the light switch.
There's too much to be scared of. Yeah.
Too much. Absolutely. Mm-hmm. I like this graphic that you found, looking like it's from Dr. Laura Walsh, but having the core self, those 6 C's, I guess there's 8 in there. Adventurous, stable. Okay, look at the 6 C's that are in there that we talked about, but there's the core self. Then you've got the managers, what their main jobs are, the exiles, and then the firefighters. And I really like the idea of exploring what sexual concerns that you have that are being addressed by managers, firefighters, or your exiles, and being able to identify them through interviewing your parts, I thought was very important and a great practice on either a daily basis, but at least to try and understand yourself, exploring and interviewing these parts. Did you have any thoughts on interviewing your own parts, Cami?
Well, I realized Richard Schwartz really likes alliteration because
He does.
these were the 6 F's of interviewing your parts, and there was the 6 C's of yourself. And so he really likes alliteration. But I thought it was really great for him to offer something that readers without a clinician could try to use for self-knowledge. And that's not something that all books are geared toward, especially in pop psych world. It's nice that he offered something that we could do at home to try to learn about ourselves. And he did say, though, if you're going through some big T trauma, or you're worried about how locked down they are, to not do this alone, to do this with a therapist if you think it could be problematic. But, he says, find that part of you, focus on that part of you, flesh it out, feel toward it, befriend it, and ask it what it's scared of. And on those 6 F's, the one that I thought the most about was the befriending it. Because I think too often our approach for change or progress or self-development is to just be a bigger bully. I have to go to the gym. I hate my body. I've got to change it, and we're just going to bully ourselves into being better. And he says that is so antithetical. That is where managers and firefighters go to protect us. And often it's not with wisdom, but the wisdom of an adult. And so he says to befriend that part of you instead of to be its bully. That change comes when we actually accept it and we listen to that part of us. We figure out what it's scared of, and we let it know it can trust us and it can behave differently. And so that's what stood with me the longest as I was mulling over the book is, am I trying to be a better person by bullying these parts of myself? What's standing in the way of me befriending that part of me? What am I scared of that keeps me from befriending it and taking it under my wing and showing some compassion and integration,
And the awareness is so important. If you bring these parts into it, the finding, the fleshing out, befriending, and understanding, showing that compassion, that curiosity, wow, you can start to feel it in your body. And then you can preemptively, instead of being reactive, you can be proactive about having compassion for yourself. Because when it shows up in the future, it's happening again. Oh, that's that sensation of tightness in my chest and my throat. And it's in this situation again, which probably means that I feel like I'm about to get rejected or I'm about to get hurt. Okay, it's that part. How do I go give it a hug? How do I go give this 10-year-old part of me that is so scared? And mine was the fear. I really liked being able to check in and go, if you don't do your job, what are we most afraid of? We will die. We will be exiled. We will have zero money. We will have zero sex. I will be rejected and no one will ever love me. Any of those fears is like, of course you're going to do everything in your power to make sure that doesn't happen. And then being able to feel that compassion and curiosity, doing exactly what you just said with the befriending. I loved that combination in how you start using those 6 C's of exploring this, connecting. But the main parts within it is the compassion. For me, what stood out was working with the calmness, being compassionate, getting clear with what their fears are, their worries. And then I want to say just coming back to that compassion, being able to be compassionate about the experience this inner person, this inner part is experiencing, so that you can calm that and then come back to yourself and make those decisions and be like, I got this. I can do this. And you're with me. And then they can
work together. Let's all work together for an identified, intentional, wise goal. Let's work together, guys.
Yes, absolutely. So I think within this, if we're going to come to it, this one was a really easy switch to sexual health on top of all the other things you could work on. I love this book, Cami. It's helped tons of my clients. It's helped me. And I've really enjoyed that we read this book. So I highly recommend reading it. I give it a 10 out of 10 in all honesty. While it's not necessarily, if it's just for sex, if you're saying, I want to improve my sex life, it's not going to walk you through the sexual health principles. It's not going to do things on the sexual health realm, but I believe it's easily extrapolated to when I'm sitting in my bedroom and I think my partner may want to have sex with me and I start to feel this and this, it's the same process of how he works you through it. So in all honesty, I give this one 10 out of 10 sexies just for life in general.
Yeah, it's definitely not directed towards sex, but it's a framework you can use for sex, for eating, for relationships, for anything that you feel is a stumbling block. It really is. I'm wondering if you're going to go do an IFS training then.
Oh, I might do an IFS training.
I'll come with you. That'd be fun.
I've been doing parts of it as time has been going on. Anyways, I just haven't been doing IFS. I've been doing parts of it, and then exploring this has helped to improve that. So I may just go do that because that's pretty sweet.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to give it 8 out of 10. If I didn't have any background in systems theory, I wondered if I might be a little lost, but I'm not sure about that.
Ooh.
I think he laid a really good groundwork. And I think as far as self-help psychology goes, this is one that's really helpful to integrate, where you could really do these exercises of identifying your managers, identifying your firefighter, and identifying your exiles and talking to them, real inner child type work. I think it'd be really transformative if someone were to read it and integrate it. And I think I'm hesitant to give it 10 out of 10 because I think there are certain personalities that it might feel not solution focused enough.
That is a fair assessment within that.
Some personalities like tell me their manager says, give me the 10 steps to fix this. This isn't that kind of book. This is a much more feely book. So engineering type brains might struggle a little bit more with it, but right-brained people are going to really enjoy it.
Agreed. The people that I've seen latch onto this really well work past the first thing thinking, I've got parts in me, so I'm dissociative identity disorder and I'm crazy. No. As soon as we move past that one, I've seen a lot of people get into a really good place of, oh, I can work with this, but I can totally see that if you're like, tell me the steps, this one is going to be more, what do you see? Versus this is how you do it. So I could see that. I still stick with my 10 out of 10 because I've been excited about it, but I think that
doesn't mean it's not a good book. I can just see a few of my clients being like, this is really touchy-feely.
8 out of 10 is still a boss report on this. So,
yeah. But the therapist to me is like, oh, your manager's really, really exiled the touchy-feely part of you. Why are you scared?
Oh boy, that's awesome. Well, thank you everybody for being a part of this sexy book club when it comes to No Bad Parts. That concludes season 1 of Sexplorers podcast. Woo! Super excited that we've got this in the books. You can continue to check out any of the past ones at Sexy Book Club on YouTube, as well as on each of our podcasts. Our next season will start up May 1st. And that one's going to start with another Sexy Book Club, Love Worth Making by Dr. I almost said Schwartz.
Snyder.
It's the other S one.
Steven Snyder, a marriage family therapist and certified sex therapist.
Yes. So we're going to go over that one.
I'm wrong. He's an MD and a sex therapist.
MD and a sex therapist. So we're excited to start with that one. So we'll have a couple weeks hiatus. We won't have anything over the summer, but we are going to do multiple weeks before we end in June. So stay tuned. We're looking forward to seeing y'all then.
Yeah, feel free to reach out to us if you have questions.
Absolutely. Okay. Thank you, Sexplorers. We'll see you in a couple of weeks.